Alcyone, the Templar seal. The Templar seal and Annu-Melchizedek and Hebrew races Realignmentofte Melchizedek The Annu-Melchizedek and Hebrew races Removedant Saras Egyptians and Cloister Melchizedeks Guardi and Sotharkov. Covenant. Resurrecting Great Pyramid and Sphinx 8000 BC 5466 BC The races who returned from the inner earth to re-establish surface civilization. After the 9558 BC sinking of the Atlantean islands, were faced with many new hardships as rebuilding of their cultures was orchestrated through manual labor, without the use of the great crystal generators and high-powered ankhs to which they had become accustomed. Following the employment of Earth's quarantine in 9540 BC, and its resulting genetic mutation, evolution became an even slower, more arduous task. The Egyptian Saras, Annu-Melchizedeks and Hebrew peoples were guardians of the Ark of the Covenant and were permitted to have custody of the rod and the staff so their connection to the inner Earth civilizations could remain open. The Great Pyramid and the Sphinx suffered damage during the flooding that followed the downfall of Atlantis. But portions of these and other structures remained intact, and these were once again used as a central hub around which the cultures would rebuild. The Saras Egyptians remained as the royal line in Egyptian culture, while remnants of the Lemurian and Atlantean cultures and the Brinawa and Urantrian cloisters, the Annu-Melchizedeks of the inner earth, the Hibiru, Aryans, Cloister Melchizedeks and the Hebrew races populated Egypt and various other locations of the globe. The first number of generations were preoccupied with survival issues and the development of small cultural clans, which eventually led to the development of larger social orders. The Egyptian culture received much assistance from the inner earth races as the Ark of the Covenant was located within the Egyptian lands and surface guardianship of this and other portal passages was placed in the hands of the developing races in this area. During the retreat to the inner earth at the time of the sinking of Atlantis, numbers of Templar Annu had also entered the inner territories. The Templar Annu were those born into the Atlantean sub-race, Egyptian race through the Melchizedek host matrix, who later interbred with members of the Anunnaki resistance, inheriting all or part of the genetic distortion Templar seal from this extraterrestrial race. The Templar Annu interbred with many different races in generations following Atlantis, especially with those of the Annu-Melchizedek and Hebrew, Hibiru Melchizedek, lines, passing on concentrations of the Templar seal distortion throughout the Melchizedek races. The distortions of the Templar creed had also made their way into the inner earth societies and their patriarchal, elitist, sexist, materialistic slant began to color the original teachings of the Templar within certain groups. These creed distortions became apparent in the evolution of the surface cultures, as did the progression of the Templar seal genetic distortion, as well as various other genetic anomalies that were created through interbreeding with a variety of interstellar visitors during the times of Atlantis. 1. The genetic distortions were of great concern to the Paladorians and Guardian races, as if the deviations in the DNA imprint became too numerous, the original imprint for the races would be lost. If enough soul essences from lineage with deviating genetic imprints passed back into their race morphogenetic field at death, those deviations would eventually override the original patterns in the morphogenetic field. If the Amenti race morphogenetic field became misaligned with the 12-strand pattern, evolution of the 12-strand DNA package could not take place. In order to preserve the integrity of the Turanusium 2/human genetic line, the Syrian Council and Elohim were authorized by the Ra Confederacy to remove certain portions of the race morphogenetic field from the sphere of Amenti, so the Amenti race morphogenetic field would not become misaligned by deviations in the genetic imprint. The races removed from Amenti would pass through the planetary morphogenetic field of Alcyone, and after death the soul essence would evolve as consciousness for a time within the frequency fields of Alcyone, through which genetic deviations of the human line could be processed out before the consciousness returned to the sphere of Amenti. This separation of the morphogenetic fields became known as the Templar seal. It involved removing the sixth base tone of the second DNA strand, the 6th overdone of the 4th DNA strand and the 12th overdone of the 5th DNA strand. The races bearing this genetic imprint configuration were sealed out of the sphere of Amenti morphogenetic field and redirected into evolution through Alcyone, with the intention of one day releasing the Templar seal and re-entering their morphogenetic field back into the sphere of Amenti for ascension. The races bearing the most genetic deviation were those of the Templar Annu, who had been seeded through the Melchizedek host matrix, and through them larger portions of the Melchizedek cloister had become misaligned with the 12-strand DNA imprint. Through the Melchizedek morphogenetic field, the Hebrew Melchizedeks and Annu-Melchizedeks also carried one, the Zephelium. The original race line of the modern-day Zeta Reticuli and their Greys were one of the visiting groups to Atlantis who became genetically mixed with some of the Templar Annu race families. The reason contemporary Zeta sought genetic material from our race was that they hoped to find traces of their own original genetic imprint in our DNA, so they could reverse the mutations that had occurred in their own genetic lines and create hybrid versions of themselves more suited to Earth's environment. Excessive genetic deviation. So the morphogenetic fields of these three groups were chosen for realignment through Alcyone. It is important to note that the genetic deviations carried by these groups were not inferior or bad. The deviations simply would have taken those aspects of humanity on a different evolutionary course. This would have eventually redirected the entire course of human evolution, and the original Tyrannusium 12-strand DNA package would no longer be available to the human lineage of Earth. The 12-strand package is one of the highest genetic imprints within HU1 and HU2, for it allows full transmutation out of matter and can embody the consciousness of a 12-dimensional oversoul when the 12 strands are fully activated. Very few biological forms possess this potential. Humans carrying the lineage of the deviated genetic codes are in no way inferior to other human strains, and as long as excessive deviations are not allowed to alter the original Amenti morphogenetic field, those races do not pose a threat to the human lineage. As you will see, through the course of this chapter, the Guardian races have ensured the integrity of the human genetic imprint, and have also made it possible for the races deviating from that imprint to return and ascend through the sphere of Amenti. The Hebrew morphogenetic field was realigned and entered into the sphere of Amenti about 2,000 years ago with the birth of the man who has come to be known as Jesus Christ, and the Annu-Melchizedeks and Templar Annu were re-entered into Amenti about 3,300 years ago with the birth of the pharaoh Akhenaten Amenophis IV. At your present point in history, all of your races are part of the Amenti morphogenetic field, and all of you are in the process of healing and assembling various DNA configurations. We do not want the more immature among you to misuse this information on genetic lineage as grounds for unfair and discriminatory attitudes toward other members of your race, for such discrimination has no intelligent basis and is groundless. We would also like to mention here that of the 3rd through 7th root races and their cloisters, each of the 7 sub-races within each race carries one of the race strains from each of the 7 root races. For example, those of the Aryan root race affiliated with the Hibiru cloister, who carry the gene code imprint for the white-skinned races, have within their 7 sub-races a white-skinned subrace with a dominant Aryan or Hibiru cloister gene, a black-skinned subrace with a dominant Yuanjhachi or Unicidi cloister gene, a yellow-skinned subrace with a dominant Muvarian or Melchizedek cloister gene, a brown-skinned subrace with a dominant Lemurian or Urantrian gene, and a red-skinned subrace with a dominant Atlantean or Brinawa cloister gene. There will also be 2 additional subraces which bear the primary skin color of their root race and cloister, who carry a dominant gene from the first Polarian and second Hyperborean root races of Gaia. Each of the primary root races and their cloisters have this intermixed subracial division. The 7 subfamilies within each of the 7 subraces are even further intermixed. We tell you this so you may come to realize that all of your races, though diversified in genetic content, are equal in value, and all of them, by the design of their morphogenetic pattern, are intertwined. Discrimination of race, genetic lineage, or skin color is as ridiculous and unfounded a notion as gender discrimination. Both of these ideas were given to you at various periods by different groups, often terrestrial visitors, in order to manipulate the evolution of the races for their own purposes. These notions have kept your races and genders at odds, competing for who is better or best, when instead the true power and beauty of the human races lies within its unity, which allows for diversification. You are all of equal value and importance, and each of you brings unique characteristics and gifts into the human gene pool. It would do your species well to realize this fact, so you can learn to work together, through which all of you may heal and prosper. Now we will conclude our discussion on the realignment of the Melchizedek morphogenetic field. Following the implementation of the Templar seal upon the Annu and Hebrew morphogenetic fields, these groups were provided with teachings from the priesthood of Ur in the lunar earth, through which they were counseled not to interbreed with members of the other races, so as not to pass on the Templar seal gene configuration. Unfortunately, these teachings eventually became distorted. The original meaning for the ban on interracial mixing became lost, and the teachings evolved into an elitist creed of genetic superiority among these groups. This attitude was perpetuated within the Annu and Hebrew races and later developed into unnecessary cultural discord between those of Annu and Hebrew lineage, and the Seres Egyptian ruling class, and the Hebrew, Aryan and Cloister Melchizedek families who made up the majority of the Egyptian nation's populations. This interracial discord exaggerated already existing conditions of competition and conquest among the races. When the halls of Amenti were opened in 1374 BC, this interracial discord proved to be a second primary setback to preparation for the 2017 AD mass ascension wave. Due to interracial difficulties between the Annu-Melchizedek and the Seres Egyptian majorities, the halls of Amenti were once again closed and mass preparation for ascension was curtailed. When the Templar seals were applied in 8000 BC, guardianship of the Ark of the Covenant was transferred out of the hands of the Annu-Melchizedeks and Hebrew races into the protection of the Seres Egyptians and Cloister family Melchizedeks. Those born through the sphere of Amenti Melchizedek Cloister after the Annu and Hebrew morphogenetic fields had been removed. Previously the four races shared responsibility and accessibility to the Ark of the Covenant, but following the Templar seal only Cloister Melchizedeks and Seres Egyptians were permitted direct involvement with the inner earth priesthood of Ur, whose training kept knowledge of the Ark of the Covenant alive within the surface cultures. From 8000 BC forward the cultures developed with greater racial divisions, some groups leaving the areas which came to be known as Giza, integrating into other cultural bases along the Nile River, such as Thebes and into Nubia, others journeying into the territories of what came to be known as Jerusalem, and Sumeria and Ur along the Euphrates River, intermixing with the descendants of the other root races and their cloisters. The Seres Egyptians and Cloister Melchizedeks remained concentrated in the area of Giza where the Ark of the Covenant entered the earth, and continued to build up their civilizations, with periods of achievement tempered by periods of digression. During the height of pre-dynastic Egypt, following an influx of cultures from various other regions, the Seres Egyptians and Cloister Melchizedeks, under the direction of the priesthood of Ur, made an attempt to reconstruct the remains of the Great Pyramid of Giza and the Sphinx, which had been damaged in the deluge following the sinking of Atlantis in 9958 BC. Using manual labor, the Great Pyramid was restored around 5546 BC, as a religious center through which the Ark of the Covenant was fortified and secured. But the structure no longer served as an interstellar teleport due to the pole tilt resulting from the Atlantean cataclysm and the frequency fence of 9540 BC. The Sphinx was reconstructed around 5466 BC. The contours of the structure's facial features were altered to more closely resemble the appearance of the Seres Egyptian line, and the stronger, more exaggerated facial features characteristic to the Anunnaki lineage, who originally designed the structure in 46459 BC, were omitted from the reconstruction. The form of the leonine body remained as a tribute to remembered gods of Egyptian mythology, who represented symbolic trace memories of ancient Anunnaki affiliations with the Hu-2 leonine races. The early dynastic periods of Egypt emerged around 3500 BC, bearing increasing influence of cultural influx from various other regions. The Ark of the Covenant, Sphere of Amenti and the tools of the rod and the staff became closely guarded secrets, held within the confines of select Seres. Egyptian and Melchizedek Cloister families with whom the priests of Ur continued covert contact.